So relying on the teacher is a chapter of Lamrim is divided primarily into how to teach, but also how to rely upon the teacher and why the teacher is important. The general focus of this is in terms of the teacher of the spiritual path, but a lot of this actually applies also to the general, in general, to teachers, and developing a sense of understanding or rapport with one's teacher as a way of being able to increase the efficacy or the ability for that teacher to affect us. Now, obviously, it's important that we're doing that in a way which is in accordance with what we wish for. But normally, for instance, if we're learning piano or mathematics or whatever, we're expecting some basic qualities, one of them being that the teacher knows at least a little bit more than we do, and so on. So some of those things are also relevant for us here. So Lama Tsongkhapa starts off quoting Atisha, who wrote the Lamp of the Path, with Atisha's digest of Hridaya, means the heart. One who abides in the lineage of the Mahayana has relied upon an excellent teacher. Oh, talking of which, I have completely forgotten. So we really should set, showing mindfulness here. We should really start the session developing motivation practice. I'll just go straight in. I've been working on it all day. So motivation, again, is setting our mind to say, let's use this session and any subsequent meditations for the benefit of helping myself develop myself, become Buddha even, in order to benefit everybody, to benefit all beings. So what I want to do is to make use of every moment of this to inform me and do what I can to become a better person for the world. Right. So really try to do this a bit sincerely. Thank you. So Doba, this is a student of Geshe Bordawai. These are Kadam Lamas, who are students of Atisha, and the lineage of this Kadam is primarily where Lama Tsongkhapa got a lot of his Tibetan sources from, his Tibetan practice from. And Geshe Bordawai said, of all the personal instructions, the pith instructions, do not give up the excellent teacher is the prime instruction. So the general message is that the teacher, a Dharma teacher, is the source of all temporary happiness and certain goodness, a guaranteed enlightenment, beginning with production of a single good quality, and the reduction of the reduction of a single fault in a student's mind. As soon as a teacher has been able to do that, then there is some benefit established there, and eventually this grows to being able to encompass all the knowledge beyond that, essentially to the state of a Buddha's mind. So the way in which you initially rely upon a teacher is really important. So again, Geshe Bordawai says, if you look at this, it's important to recognize that although we can learn a lot by watching, in the end, by having a guide, having somebody to teach us helps. And likewise with that rapport, with that relationship, it would be very difficult for us to actually make a significant difference in terms of our practice. And Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say that there's many different lists of defining characteristics of what makes a good teacher, and so on. Again, Lama Tsongkhapa chooses Maitreya's text from Asanga for his basic list, which is rely upon a Mahayana teacher who is disciplined, serene, thoroughly pacified, has good qualities surpassing those of the students, is energetic, has a wealth of scriptural knowledge, possesses loving concern, has thorough knowledge of reality and skill in instructing disciples, and has abandoned dispiritedness. So I'm going to do my best today to cover the chapter. It's actually quite a long chapter. So I'm going to do my best because it's important to follow the whole context of this in terms of what sounds almost impossible becomes much more understandable in the bigger picture. So Lam Rim Chenmo then uses this verse that has just been, he's just cited from the Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, and he says, it's very difficult. It's really for those people who have no discipline themselves, how could they possibly act as a basis for the disciplining of others? And therefore, if you're talking about self-discipline, then you must have discipline yourself. Essentially, this is sort of like saying, if I am going to teach it, I must do it and practice what I preach. And also then, there's the question, which is, well, how are they to be disciplined? And the result of this is in terms of saying the three precious teachings in this case, disciplined, serene, and thoroughly pacified. In other words, three higher trainings that we've talked about before of ethical behavior, concentration, and insight. So he says often also it's useful if you've got one of the advantages of being taught by a monk is that they have the vows of individual liberation, the vows of having chosen to live a spiritual life. And these are like a bridle, which when you're dealing with an untrained horse or whatever, you can use the bridle that's particularly suited for that. And that helps to bring the horse, the wild horse of our mind into some sort of control. Now, the actual description here is rather cruel. It talks about bridles set with sharp nails. We wouldn't dream of harnessing our ponies with sharp nail bridles, but I can imagine that maybe some people in the old times did do that. Fortunately, the path to enlightenment in terms of self-discipline is not like fitting oneself with a bridle of nails. However, and this is the point that he's making again, Lam Tsongkhapa is making again in reference to the quote from Maitreya, is the three higher trainings aren't enough. Also, it is having a wealth of scriptural knowledge, having the ability to know the three scriptural collections, if you like, the three baskets, the Tripitaka of the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, and the Sutra. But there are other ways of also looking at that. And the point about this is that in order to be able to teach well, especially the Mahayana, is to have deep understanding, not shallow understanding. And again, something that we were talking about previously in terms of having a deep understanding is really a connection, something that actually changes us. And on that, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a very highly regarded geshe last night. And I was just reflecting back on some of the things that we talked about last Monday, particularly about death awareness and how important it is to keep it fresh. Otherwise, we have this thing of as it as we become less from, as the condition, our illness or whatever, or the deaths in our family go into the past, we tend to forget the quality of that realization. And he was saying that's absolutely right. So the freshness, keeping these realizations fresh, is one of the purposes of having a daily meditation, where we reflect upon and re-examine and revisit and reconnect with the various aspects of our path that we're developing, including death awareness. And His Holiness Dalai Lama has talked before about how every day he, in terms of a part of his daily practice in the early morning, is he meditates on compassion until there are tears coursing down his cheeks. And he does this not, he's not being an actor. He's not just like rubbing onions in his eyes. That's not the point. The point is to reconnect with his realization of compassion to the point where he can actually feel it. So that's what we're looking for, is the ability to try to find a way of being able to facilitate or resonate the Buddha Dhamma in a way which actually reaches the student. And this is what's really meant by the wealth of scriptural understanding or knowledge. And it says here specifically, when a teacher is putting the teachings into practice, you need to demonstrate what is helpful at the time, especially when teaching is on the wane, and what is useful in the situation at hand. So again, it's very practical, pragmatic, looking at what's required in the moment. So in terms of insight, knowledge, reality, it says ideally is if you have a direct perception of reality. If you have a direct perception of reality, then it's very easy, it's very hard to make a mistake as an Arya. But Lama Tsongkhapa recognizes that this is quite rare, and so he says if you've got a good intellectual understanding, then that's okay. So again, he says, even though a teacher might have the qualities of scriptural learning and knowledge, as well as the 3 higher trainings, it's still not enough for the good qualities, in that they also need to have qualities that are greater than or surpass their students. And in fact, he quotes an Indian text called The Verses About Friends, where he says people will degenerate by relying upon those inferior to themselves. By relying on equals, they'll stay the same. By relying on the superior, they attain excellence. Thus, rely upon those who are superior to yourself. Especially if you're able to rely upon those whose experience, pacification, and discipline, as well as wisdom, exceed you, then you'll become superior even to those who are currently superior to yourself. So these 6 qualities, Lama Tsongkhapa says, these 6 qualities, being disciplined, having a calm mind, thoroughly pacified through wisdom, having good qualities that surpass the students, a wealth of knowledge from studying scriptures and being able to know how to explain in that way, and an actual direct knowledge of reality. These are the conditions that are required by the teacher. The remaining qualities being energetic, having skill in instruction, and possessing loving concern and abandoning dispiritedness, are those that are required for looking after others. So he then cites a sutra. He says, the wise do not wash away sins with water. They do not clear away being sufferings with their hands. They do not transfer their knowledge to others. They liberate by teaching the truth of reality. and this is to say this, in this sense, the sages or the wise are the Buddhas. And what it's saying is the Buddhas themselves are not able to change you. This is something we talked about before. We have to change ourselves. So in that sense, what we need to do is to engage in and develop a resonance with what is being said, understand it, and then take ownership of it. So one of the things, I'm going to slightly deviate from the text here, but one of the things about this, relying on the teacher, this text, is it's actually very rare to hear this. Normally, when a Lama is teaching or a Geshe is teaching to his students, even Lamrim, they often skip this chapter because they don't want their students to sort of think, I'm telling you how you need to think of me as this great master. So it's very rare, actually, even within a tradition, for a teacher to teach this chapter. They often will skip it, or they'll talk about it very slightly. The first time I heard this teaching was actually by Geshe, but it was because I was sort of secretly at the back of the room when he was teaching students of Geshe Wongchen in London. This is in 1979. And it was the first Lamrim teaching that I received. I don't have that particular compunction because I don't really see myself as being a teacher in this sense. I see myself far more as being as a fellow student sharing the words of the teacher, in this sense, Lama Tsong-kha-pa. And likewise, Geshe Damshala. So when I first joined the center, when I first became a resident at the Lam Rim Buddhist Center, there was 1983 or 1982, around this time anyway. And several of the students were talking about who their guru is and their root guru is. And I'd been doing a lot of practice, daily practice myself, in the shrine room, lots of prostrations and mandala offerings and refuge, and also Gandhanagya, which is this guru yoga of Lama Tsongkhapa. And in terms of it, what they were asking, and they were hoping, these fellow students were like saying, so who's your teacher, Ben? Now, my teacher at that time, in terms of who had given me Dharma teachings, was Geshe Damshala, nobody else. But I felt that if I said that, they might find that a bit hard to accept. So instead I said, which is also true, my teacher is Lama Tsongkhapa. After all, the text that we were studying was the Lam Rim Chenmo, and everything that Geshe was teaching me was the Lam Rim Chenmo. And they were like, huh? And one of them went to Geshe and said, Ben says his guru is Lama Tsongkhapa. What does that mean? And Geshe said, don't you worry about that. And then later on, he said to me, Ben, come, like this. And I was like a bit nervous. And he said, well, you said to somebody your teacher's Lama Tsongkhapa. And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, where did you get that from? And I said, I don't know. It just seemed the right thing. And he said, it's very good. So in that sense, I feel when we're looking at that, it's better really for us to think about the teacher being Lama Tsongkhapa or Geshe Damshala, not them. Yeah. So I don't feel any compunction about this, because I don't feel that me myself is being anything other than really reflecting on these real teachers. But in terms of this, it's still relevant for us to have a degree of respect in this sense on our teacher, in this case Lama Tsongkhapa, and Atisha, and Geshe Damshala as well, and our own, and His Holiness, and so on, according to our own understanding. So in terms of skill in instructing disciples, again, this is something I've referred to earlier on. Possessing love and concern refers to having a pure motivation for giving teachings, and it's absolutely relevant. The motive for teaching is love and compassion, and does not look for gain or respect or money or anything like that. And in fact, Geshe Bodowa again said to a friend of his, Jengawa, this is probably 1,000 or more years ago. However many teachings I have explained, I've never really taken any pleasure to even a single thanks. All beings are helpless. Everyone needs help. And Lama Tsongkhapa says the teacher should be like this. Energetic refers to a constant delight in others' welfare, in terms of continually being willing to repeat and re-explain according to the individual's needs. And having abandoned dispiritedness refers to never being tired, again, of repeating explanations and or of teaching Dharma. So some Tibetans, some Lamas have come to the West, and they found Western students very, very hard to deal with. And they've become a little bit dispirited. They're like, there's no point really, because whatever I go, you know, in one ear out the other, or it's mixed up with all of these funny ideas, or it's not treated seriously. It's just some sort of dressing up occasion or something like this. So some of them found it very, very difficult. Some of this is possibly because the way in which we culturally we listen to teachings or accept teachings is different. But in the end, this is also one of these aspects here. And Lama Tsongkhapa then uses an explanation from the King of Concentration Sutra, an Indian Mahayana sutra. And he says, when we look at people, teachers who achieve their own livelihood, they actually make a living out of praising or explaining the good quality of the Dharma, but actually don't strive themselves to practice, they're not suitable to be teachers at all. And this sort of activity is really not valuable. And the King of Concentration Sutras mentions, it says, in later times there will be many monks who don't keep their vows, wanting to say, I'm learned, and they will praise ethical discipline, but they will not strive at their own discipline. And then the actual example they give, it's like sort of somebody who's making money, talking about how wonderful, like a salesperson, if you like, how wonderful the qualities of sandalwood are, saying sandalwood is like this, it has this beautiful, pleasant aspect, and it's so delicious and really special and holy and can be used for all of these amazing things. And then somebody might say, you know, have you got some? And they're like, no, I've got none, right? So having just been able to tell you lovely stories about the sandalwood, and that's how they're making their money, but they don't actually have any sandalwood to give, is a bit like this. So the idea of saying really primarily, we don't give for the purpose of making of livelihood or for making money. And again, also, we do our best to teach what we actually practice ourselves, and we practice what we teach when we can. So then one of Lama Tsongkhapa's students is asking, because we live in a very degenerate time, and if that was true then, it certainly is true too now, it's very difficult to find a teacher who has all of these good qualities. Therefore, what should we do if we cannot find such a teacher? And he quotes a tantra by request by Subahu, which is that when it's very hard to find somebody who has all of these qualities, then one should look for somebody who has 1/2 or 1/4 or even 1/8 of these qualities. And so in a sense, there's an idea of saying that at least you should have a little bit of these qualities. And Atisha has said, in terms of, Bodowa, quoting Atisha, said, yeah, we can use this tantra also within the general the general case of the teacher. So the 400 verses, this is one of the texts that I mentioned right at the beginning of the series, which is again and again used, Ayadeva's 400 verses. Somebody pointed out to me that I am a bit like the Spanish Inquisition here, and I'll say there are 3, and then I'll say, no, there are 4. And that does happen. So in this particular case, though, the 400 verses is one of the core texts that Lama Tsongkhapa uses a lot in the Lam Rim. And he says, this is in terms of the listening, the student, the characteristics of the student is somebody who is non-partisan, intelligent, diligent, right? And these qualities are also required for the teacher. So one of these things is that going back to what we were talking about last week is the idea of non-partisan, is this nature, this understanding of inclusivity, of not taking sides, of not saying, well, you know, yes, it's that. Discriminating wisdom awareness is very useful. Being able to make an assessment is very, very useful. But to still say, oh, I'm with these guys because, you know, so I'm Chelsea, I'm a Chelsea supporter, and you know, don't look at that, oh, Arsenal are terrible. This is where we begin to start making mistakes. And when we Bhava Baker, who one of the wisdom teachers, insight teachers, says in his commentary to the middle way, it's through taking sides that the mind becomes distressed and you'll never know peace. So part of this is that taking sides on these issues keeps our mind disturbed. And if our mind is disturbed, we find it very, very hard to meditate. So develop that calmness, serenity. So then it's like saying, okay, well, you talk about the importance of non-partisan, is that enough? And the answer is no. You also obviously must be able to distinguish between good paths, correct paths, and incorrect paths. Otherwise, it's very hard because you need to have some intelligence that understands how to be able to differentiate. So this idea of primarily is the development of discriminating awareness, our own ability to assess and consider whether or not this works, whether or not it's a part of the path to enlightenment for ourselves. These are the qualities that we need to develop in ourselves. And then again, is these two enough? And it says, well, also you need to, if you're not doing your practice, if you're not taking part in this in a general way, then you're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to affect you. And just the same as a piano teacher. You know, you can go to you can pay for the greatest piano teacher in the world to teach piano, but if you don't do your piano practice, you won't know piano, right? So exactly the same. So again, and he then Lama Tsongkhapa then paraphrases Chandrakirti, who was another great wisdom insight teacher, and he says primarily one needs to strive diligently, remembering the purpose for why we're doing this practice, keeping the mind focused well and listening clearly and carefully while to teaching. Having great respect for the teaching and its instructor, as I said here, we're talking about Lama Tsongkhapa rather than me, or Geshe or His Holiness are all acceptable. And then discarding bad explanations and retaining good. And I think the point is we do need to be a bit careful here that sometimes a teacher, even a great teacher, might teach in a way which it doesn't necessarily resonate for us. And when that happens, it's important for us not necessarily just to reject it, especially if we accept them as a teacher. In these cases, it's better for us to accept that these teachings while they aren't suitable for me, they might be suitable for others. So what we're looking though is to find those things in what it is that we're listening that resonates with us, that informs us to become a better person in the moment. So actually affects us, and that's what we're looking for. Is those opportunities. Doesn't matter, not just Dharma. This is and everything. Those things, those opportunities that give us that ability for us to excel, to really excel. And they can come from anywhere. Yeah. My father has said before, it's so funny how much Dharma you can find in the lyrics of a Beatles song. And that's true. In some senses, it's like we don't need to limit ourselves. If once we've understood the path, and this is one of the great qualities about understanding the path and why Lam Rim, for instance, is such a liberating force, is that then that allows for us to recognize and accept or reject those things which are or are not a Dharma for us. Yeah. While we don't know what the path is, it's a bit harder. So when we're not really sure about whether or not this is or this is not part of the path, it's harder for us to know whether or not it's just a great song lyric, right? But when we've got a clear idea of the path, then we can see what the benefits are there. So that's why actually developing one of the qualities of having something like Lam Rim, which covers all of the different aspects of the path, provides us as that jigsaw puzzle that I talked about last week or the week before. That jigsaw puzzle helps us to then see just how things fit together. And allows for us to have a more provide more opportunity in those things around us. So then he says, if you don't have these qualities as a student, then it's a good idea to try to cultivate those qualities as much as one can. And in fact, one of the things I found when I was a young student at Lam Rim was I felt that while I had a lot of energy, my focus of mind wasn't very good, and I felt quite confused by some of the teaching, and I really had very little ability to recognize a good or bad explanation. And so I did Ganden Lagye. Ganden Lagye is a short guru yoga to Lama Tsong-kha-pa. In fact, the picture on the front of the book here is actually a Ganden Lagye visualization. And in that, there's a beautiful series of wisdom meditations where we develop blessings of the Buddhas in the way of aspects of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, to help bring our mind. I actually personally found that very useful. Whether or not it's just a placebo or not, I don't know. But for me, it was very useful anyway. Very, very, very useful indeed. So then it says, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the teacher, we've talked a little bit about the student, and then really ideally we should try and find a teacher once we have developed those. And what do they look like? And Lama Tsongkhapa says, that actually, if we look at Geshe Tsongkhapa and Sungpa, who are two renowned teachers, their biography was completely different about how they found teachers. Sungpa had many, many, many different teachers, listened to any explanation wherever he was, and even when he was a monk, he was a very, very highly respected monk. But there was when he visited Kham, which is the eastern side of Tibet, he would stop and listen to the sort of street preachers, like going to Hyde Park Corner and listening to these sort of street preachers who are a bit like some of the sort of people who speak religion on the street corner. And his students were like, it's not really appropriate to receive teachings like that. And he said, don't say that. I've received benefits from this. He apparently specifically said 2 benefits. So again, it's like saying once one has a clear understanding a really clear understanding of the path, then one can use these opportunities. However, Je Tsongkhapa had very, very few teachers, and about 5 altogether. There was a discussion, and there's a text written that's still available, where they talk about which of these 2 were the best to really, and in the end, they said Je Tsongkhapa is a better in terms of explaining to students how to behave. Because one can think, oh, I can listen to anybody and I'll get it. And in fact, especially when we have many, many different teachings, even within Buddhism, available to us, we need to determine that. We need to recognize that single words or phrases are actually mean different things according to the context of the tradition. And if we don't know that, then a single word like Dharmakaya, for instance, means something in one tradition, it means something completely different in another tradition. And therefore, if we don't know the context of those meanings, how they're being used, why they're being used, we end up just confused or mistaking everything, or creating confusion for ourselves, at the very least. And we can also lose faith in that sense, because we don't get it, just get confused. So I can't, for me personally, this is beautiful. One of the lovely things about this text, sorry, I'm using the one with the cover again, not only received, extensive, very slow teachings, with like Judith was present for the first time when we were, I was receiving the full text from Geshe, and we were, and this particular translation, the translators depended upon teachers that were visiting Lam Rim Buddhist Center. So one of them is here. This is a photograph I took of one of the lamas who visited us, called Khenso Yeshe Tupten Rinpoche. And he was an amazing, amazing man, incredibly humble, so humble. He was considered at the time to be one of the highest lamas in Tibet by far, and His Holiness was totally in awe of him, and the Dalai Lama, and so many people were. And when he came to visit, and he stayed with us for a few months, we'd been receiving teaching on Lamrim about killing and not to kill. So this is, very important. And I really didn't want to use the lawnmower, because the lawnmower was just mowing the lawn, and it was churning up insects. And then there was this argument with senior management about whether or not the boys, me and Martin at the time, were just rebelling about not doing the work that needs to be done because we wouldn't mow the lawn. And Khenso Yeshe Tupten Rinpoche heard about this because he saw some discussion going on, and he said, "What's this all about?" And Geshe explained it to him. He didn't speak any English. And so in the morning, he got up and he went to the garage, and he got the mower out and he started mowing the lawns. And he did that for days. I mean, whenever he had nothing to do, he'd go out and he'd mow the lawns. I remember also, I was right at the bottom of the rung at Lam Rim at the time, and as a 19-year-old cheeky lad. And one of the jobs, one of my tasks was to do the washing up, whatever, there was always washing up to do. And I remember I was washing up, doing my best to say my mantras and think about washing the minds of all beings and so on. And then there's this great shove, and I was pushed to one side, and then Khenso Yeshe Tupten Rinpoche took over, right? So this is one of the highest lamas in the world. Now also, this is beautiful. I mean, his advice is used the whole way through this text, right? So his humility is incredible, and he also at the same time, Geshe had been giving a talk about attaining Buddhahood and what one needs, what the basic qualities in terms of this is a precious human rebirth. So this is a weekend course he gave on some of the qualities. And one of them was you need to have a functional body if you wish to attain Buddhahood in one life, you need to have a fully functional body. Now, I have red-green color blindness, and so and he said, you need to have perfect vision. If your eyes aren't right, then you can't become a Buddha. And so I this incredibly typical sort of arrogant way that I was going to become a Buddha in one life anyway. I was like, I got really worried that somehow my body wasn't going to work because my eyes were no good, right? And this was sort of, I hadn't said anything to anybody. It was just there in the back of my, I was young. And Khyentse Rinpoche came, and one day, and as I said, he didn't speak no English at all. And he pulled me to one side, sort of grabbed my hand and pulled me into a room, and I was like, okay, I just follow him. And then he looked in my eyes, had this lovely, lovely gaze, very, very gentle. And he had this whiskers. You see the whiskers, I can't see them properly, but he had whiskers on his chin like this as well. And Tibetans generally don't have much facial hair, so he was very proud of his whiskers. Or, well, I don't think he was proud at all, but and he pushed my hand against his whiskers like this and rubbed it there. And it was like sort of the most holy cat on the planet. And he looked at me and he said, "Your eyes are okay." Yeah. So it was this amazing sort of, I know you don't speak any English. I haven't told anybody what's going on, but he was able just to be able to pick up this one concern I had, very, very silly concern, and just put it to rest like that. So it's really, really high quality. Beautiful, beautiful. We also had many times Dhammalota Rinpoche coming to stay, Khyentse Pema Gyaltsen Rinpoche coming to stay, Khyentse Pema Gyaltsen Rinpoche also gave an initiation. Also, Geshe Damshala's classmate, Rizong Rinpoche, who's a patron today. He's very, very elderly now. Trijang also became a throne holder, considered one of the greatest lamas at the moment alive. And he was Geshe's roommate. I mean, they shared the same room in Drepung. And they're all advisors to this translation committee. Yeah. Rizong Rinpoche he's very funny. I mean, he's a very, very important Lama. And normally you think, okay, well, he sees so many students of Geshe and everybody else coming and going and whatever. And sometimes he'd call me David because of David Johnson, and he'd get confused whether I was Ben or David. And of course, it's like for Tibetan anyway, it's like, is it Sultrim, Tsungmo, Tsangmo, whatever. So for us, it's very easy. And for him, it's just the same so this is my lower mind sort of idea. And so it didn't matter, I'm Geshe student, and he recognized me as the Geshe student, and that's all that really matters to me. And I went to Ladakh with Emma, maybe 2007, I think. And at the end of the visit, I was able to offer some, I wanted to say goodbye to him. He'd been very kind to us again. And so I wanted to offer some money and so on. And so I did some prostration, and he said, stop. So in the Guru Yoga practice, as what we're doing this chapter now, it says, it takes a lot from the 50 verses, Avagosha's 50 verses of Guru Yoga, which is a very important, an informative text about how to act towards the teacher. And it said, stop. And because the Avagosha's 50 verses said you should do 3 prostrations when you meet and 3 prostrations when you depart. And I'd done 3 prostrations when I met, and I started to them, and he said, no. And so again, Rizong Rinpoche's English isn't great, but I had somebody to translate, and he explained. He said, don't offer prostrations when you depart. In Tibet, the tradition is, even though it's in Avagosha's text, the idea is if you do that, then it means that the Lama might die before you next see him. So it's like the same as, I don't know, in Tibetan tradition is you never finish your cup of tea when you're going on a long journey. You always leave it, like just take a sip or two, because then it means you're going to come back to finish the tea, right? So it's these sort of, this is sort of Tibetan cultural stuff. And so I'd done I'd done one prostration, and before he'd stopped me, I mean, it's quite heavy. He said, "Stop, stop, stop, stop." I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do what you say." And then it was 5 years in Mundgod, 4 years in Mundgod before I saw him again. I went in for audience, and I started prostration. He said, "Only 2." Just 2. And I was like, what, why? Fortunately, again, in translation, and he said, "You already did one in the back." So yeah, these teachers are incredible. Really nice, really, really funny. So many stories, too many. Here it is. He's an incredible man. Very, very nice. And when I went to, when I was I went back in 1987, got to visit Drepung Monastery in South India, Mundgod. It was very different from now. Now it's got this huge, great big marble prayer halls. And back then it was huts. There were a few huts. It was much, much more sort of bricks and makeshift and so on. But it was still the high lamas, the Rinpoches. The Khenpo at the time was Rizong Rinpoche, our Rinpoche. And Khenpo is abbot. And Khenpema Gyaltsen Rinpoche was one of the teachers who'd come, had passed away, but Ken Yeshe Thupten Rinpoche was still alive. I was really glad. In fact, my primary motive was to visit him. And the Rizong Rinpoche's house was huge, with big sort of area, reception area, very nice rooms, big dining room. And many of the Rinpoches, I don't know if you visit them, if you go to see the Kangsen where they live, they're not luxurious, but they're large now, they're spacious now, and they're comfortable. Khenpo Yeshe Thupten Rinpoche's was as small a cell as you can get. I mean, it was literally Vinaya regulations. It was not more than 6 feet wide and not more than 10 feet long. It fit a tiny single bed along one side and a tiny little footstool table next to it. That was it. That was his room. That was his house. It didn't matter that he was teaching the entire monastery the whole time. He was working 16 hours a day, teaching nonstop all the time. And he said to me, "Look, I won't be able to see you very much because of my teaching commitments. I'm sorry, but I'm very busy. But I'm so glad you're here." And he was amazing. But he mentioned me to his students. He said, "This man who's traveled thousands of miles, this young man's traveled thousands of miles just to visit us. And here you are, and you need to do your studies." So he used my presence, even though I was a feckless young moron, I guess, in one sense. He had no idea what I was doing. He was able to see this as an opportunity to express just how valuable the moments were for these monks at the monastery. I also, this is where I got my sort of famous name of Mr. Momo from that, but it's another story and another day. Anyway, we're talking about Guru Yoga, not silly stories. So essentially, we need to develop this idea of relying upon developing an emotional rapport with, to serve and venerate our teachers with great respect. This helps us, it inspires us, and it keeps us feeling connected with the Dharma, with the lineage of mind, with the idea of, yes, this path is available to me. So when we actually develop that personal relationship with our teachers, it really, really helps to us in terms of thinking, I can do this, I can meet, he's helping me, he's here to help me, or she's here to help me. There are some really important Buddhist female teachers as well. So the idea is, if you can find, if you're in the right state of mind for a teacher, and you can find a good teacher, then it makes life much, much easier. So these are some of the strengths, the benefits of relying upon a teacher. And some of the faults of not relying on teachers. So one of the things we find, again, in terms of the meditation structures for this, is to think about the benefits, thinking about the faults of not doing it, and so on. This helps us in terms of when we're meditating on developing this. And it says, you know, you should not despise the teacher. You should not, if you do that, you'll end up really confused. And then there's lots of things about saying you'll have lots of bad karma happening, and that can lead to all sorts of disturbing conditions. But I think more to the point, which is actually taking the Sutra on the concentration which perceives the Buddha of the present face to face, is if the students remain resentful or intractable or hostile towards a teacher, then that blocks the path for developing good qualities. And it's not even complex. If you have a bad relationship with your teacher, you're not going to learn much from them, and what you learn is going to be stained by that bad relationship. So His Holiness Dalai Lama has talked about this a few times, saying it's better not to feel this antipathy, this fury or frustration. It's just, you know, just finish with grace. And then his Je Rinpoche extends this somewhat to talk about saying it's not just teachers that if you find difficulty with, also bad friends. If you have developed friendships with people who are going to break your ability to practice, then this doesn't help. Sort of toxic relationships, but also in terms of with the spiritual path, when we're developing ourselves in a spiritual path, toxic relationships will actually help to diminish our ability to practice, and that's really of no value. So there are times when, if our practice is very, very strong, we can do that, and there's some benefit in terms of strengthening our practice and also actually helping to benefit those people around us. But we have to be so careful with this. It's very easy for us to fool ourselves. We have a tendency, practitioners, you know, less realized practitioners have a tendency to believe that we're stronger sometimes than we really are, and often have reasons to, you know, make excuses for why we do something, which then unfortunately we get entrapped in. And in fact, the Great Final Nirvana Sutra talks about how bodhisattvas do not fear maddened elephants as much as they fear bad friends. And mad elephants are typically elephants who are so enraged or upset that they are quite able to fling out against their nature and kill. And what they say is that while a mad elephant might destroy your body, a bad friend can destroy your mind, and that can affect your root of virtue and your path. And the verse is about friends again. Friends is important really in this sense, because the relationship one has with one teacher is as a friend. So this isn't sort of jumping ship and talking about something else. The spiritual friend or the spiritual guide, the spiritual friend is recognized as a term used for a teacher in this. So we're talking about the same thing, the same area here. And to recognize that actually friendship is often filled with opportunities for inspiration. And specifically says the wise do not befriend those without faith, who are stingy, who lie, who speak divisively. They should not accompany these people. and the verse's friend says, the person who relies upon the unreliable, who depends upon the unreliable, will have faults as a result, just as an unsmeared arrows are tainted when the arrows themselves are smeared with poison. Or when arrows are smeared with poison and placed in the same quiver. This is sort of the idea of saying, a rotten apple in the bucket creates more rotten apples. Barrel, but yeah, So in terms of the summary, briefly, of this, he also goes to say that, I don't know, there's something I wanted to share and I seem to have missed it. But I'll go back to it because it's a very nice. Yeah, I missed something. I don't know what happened there. I skipped the whole section. Big section. Yeah, so we talked about how whether or not to have many or few teachers, and one of the aspects of this then is to look at again, the Array of Stalks Sutra here says there are sort of 9 attitudes, but Je Rinpoche then, Lam Tsongkhapa then brings that down. He says these can actually be recondensed into sort of 4 or 5. 4, I think, is what he uses here. The attitude, which is like a dutiful child. Children don't initiate action on their own, but look at the parents' facial expression, submit to their will, and then do what they say. Now, in terms of what that means, is that sometimes we're looking to our teachers when we're in their presence for guidance on what to do in the moment. But also in a deeper sense, one's really trying to do, this is true in terms of the spiritual path, is to internalize that teacher until one's conscience and one's teacher's views are indistinguishable. So when I know that my conscience is speaking with Geshe-la's voice, I can rely upon that. Yeah. So having listened clearly or listened well enough to and developed a devotion to my teacher, or to Lama Tsongkhapa or to Buddha, then when I see something that might appear as a spontaneous reaction to something, is like the dividing line, the cutting line there is the conscience. That's like the teacher inside saying, no, you know better than that, or yes, that's the right thing to do. Yeah. So we are looking, in a sense, not necessarily in a some sort of mystical sense, but in terms of internalizing our teacher, our spiritual teacher, in terms of discipline, in terms of correct behavior, in terms of following the path, until our conscience and our teacher are not different. Then there's the attitude, which is like a diamond, and this is the idea of saying that the relationship between the teacher and the student is so close and stable that it cannot be split by demons, bad friends, jealousy, or other things. So the idea here is to say that when we're going back to the process of internalization, when we recognize no distinction between our conscience and our Lama, then it's very hard for anybody to break it, to shatter that, right? So we might hear some story or another, and or some fabrication about somebody, and it's like, we know ourselves whether or not that took place, because we have we rely upon our teacher. We know whether or not they would have done that. It doesn't mean they didn't do that, but it means at least we know, we're able to see, and we have still we choose to sustain the relationship based upon what they can give us, not necessarily what they can't. The attitude which is like the earth, this is the third. This is to take on the responsibilities of the activities of the Lama's activities and not become dispirited by the responsibilities that are given to you. And he then talks about what that looks like, taking on the responsibilities, which he then, again, we're looking at sort of numbers 6 attitudes. So any suffering that might arise doesn't sway you. And the example given here is Je Tsongkhapa. He was staying in a monastery which is very cold in the wintertime. And one of his students was Gonpa Yonden. No, sorry, one of the students was Gonpa Yonden, and his health was declining because of the cold. So he asked advice from one of Jengawa's senior students called Shonadrak as to whether he should leave because of his health. And Shonadrak's response as to whether or not we consider this to be responsible is another issue, but the point he's trying to make here is that we need to think carefully about what's the right thing. He said, we've stayed many times in Indra's palace where there's a beautiful, comfortable residence with many, many things. But only today do you have the experience of relying upon a precious Mahayana teacher and listening to these teachings. Therefore, stay where you are, as is proper. And of course, in nowadays, modern world, especially with YouTube and Zoom and so on, we have the privilege or benefits of both. But in sometimes the conditions could be very, very difficult. The second of these responsibilities is an attitude like a worldly servant, where we perform even the worst tasks without any wavering. And the example given in the text here is about Atisha. Lama Atisha was staying in Sang in another part of Tibet, in an area where there's lots of sewage and mud. And his top disciple, Je Tsongkhapa, took all of his clothes off, put them to one side, went and cleaned all the filth, and then he found some white earth, or like powdered earth. Nobody knew where it came from. Sprinkled it all over, removed the stench, swept it, and then even made a sort of white mandala of auspicious symbols in front of his teacher. And so he cleaned himself, put his clothes back on, and his teacher, Lama Atisha, was said to have said, I had one like you in India. So this was like my experience is not quite anything like that, but I remember when I was living again in Lam Rim, and just before Khensa Pemigats Rinpoche came, and he was again one of these amazing lamas, beautiful, beautiful lama, with a wonderful expressive teaching. So, and Geshe is like, okay, well, we need to scrub everything. And I was like, okay, right. So, Margaret and Dita were both very busy working. They were doing yoga courses or working as nurse. So it was just a lot of the time, just me and Geshe. And he said, okay, well, roll up your sleeves. So I rolled up my sleeves, and he said, okay, come with me. He took me into the toilet, his toilet area. And he said, okay, I want you to scrub all the way, all the way right through the toilet. So up the bend, everything. And I was like, what, right up the bend? He's like, oh yes, So I was like, I mean, at the time I was a teenager, like, mums, they're like, what? That's nothing, Ben. But for me as a teenager, it's like, there's even touching a toilet was like, I don't want to do that. But Geshe said to me, you do this. And I was like, okay, so I did it. And then afterwards he was like, I'm very good, So it was all right. He was like, no, you did well. But I surprised myself, I have to say, but in the end, in that sense, it's like there's no doubt it was absolutely fine to do that. I knew that his interests were in my mind. I think that's one of the things about this is to recognize when you have a very clear understanding that the interest is really only for you, there's nothing else, nothing at all, is not interested in anything else, and you trust that realization and trust that ability, then it's not so hard. Actually, these things it really isn't so hard. Then a third is an attitude like a sweeper. Now, a sweeper in Tibet is very low social status, and it's sort of, you eliminate any pride or arrogance or sense of superiority, and consider yourself to be lower than your teacher. And Geshe sort of said to me at one point, he said, you know, I think maybe you should be calling me sir, right? So like, he'd heard that, you know, in school teachers in the West called sir, and I was like, so I didn't really want to say, well, actually, although that might sound like a great sort of respectful thing, by the time you go to school especially in my generation, it's like, oh, sir. It didn't really have the same meaning at all as it might sound. So I was like, okay, I prefer to say Geshe, and he said, oh, okay, all right. All right, so then the fourth is like attitude like a fountain, which is to take even heavy responsibilities, the most arduous, with pleasure from your teacher. And then the fifth is an attitude like a dog, means not to get angry even when your Lama despises you or berates you. Again, going back to the Kadam Lamas here, there was a Lama called Lasso, and he had a student called Nyakmawa. And Nyakmawa said, you know, oh, your teacher hates us so much, both you and me, and because every time they visited Chalomba, Balungpa would say, oh, God, not you again, blah, 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 blah. And Geshe Lasso said, you know, do you think he's berating me? To me, it seems like I'm being blessed by Haruka each time he does this. So Haruka's like a wrathful deity. And the Perfection of Wisdom in 8009 says, even the instructors of the teaching seem sometimes to despise or ignore those who want the teachings. Don't challenge them. You need to be tireless and respectful and diligent in your seeking of the teachings. So again, this was something which was when I was at two things. When I was at Lam Rim, Geshe sort of trusted me. He knew that I was listening to him and accepted him as a teacher. And so sometimes when he was giving a group talk, and he'd see lots of people sort of leaning against the wall, you know, like listening if he'd see me doing that, then he'd point at me. He wouldn't point at anybody else, and said, "Get off the wall," like that. So I'd like straight away like that. And I was absolutely fine. He was completely right, but that it helped other people think, well, maybe I should do that. And I talked before about being woken up, you know, where he told me off because I'd overslept. And there's never ever anything other than love in my mind for this. It was always a love that he was giving. And I do remember once when I was still resident, somebody saying, you know, oh, I wish, they said, oh, you've got such a powerful relationship with Geshe. And I said, well, I don't think so. I think he has a strong relationship with everybody. He gives what he can to everybody. And he's, yeah, but you know, you have a special relationship. And I said, well, why do you think that? And he says, well, because he always picks on you. He always gives you a really hard time. He never does that to me. He's always nice. And I was like, I could do with some of that. It was nice. I never had a problem with it, but Sometimes it would be nice. Every now and then he might look at me and say, "It's okay, you're doing all right." But as a student, especially when I was younger, he's quite strict. In fact, there's John Peacock, who's sort of quite well known, and he used to be a trustee, and he was giving a talk at Lam Rim, and he said once, he was talking about the quality of meditation, and I said, you know, well, precocious guy that I am, I said, actually, you know, when I feel that I've done a completely virtuous day, having done everything well and correct, I feel a huge sense of bliss, especially when doing amazing sort of sense of overpowering bliss during puja. And John said, yeah, well, that's only because Geshe has been sort of at you with a stick all day. He never hit me, actually. He kicked me once, but that was something else. He was very friendly. So developing this sort of love, this tolerance, this understanding, this rapport with one's teacher opens us to enlightenment, right? So that's something that we're trying to develop and learning to develop, and continuing to learn to develop. That idea of being able to identify with one's teacher until one's conscience and one's teacher is indistinguishable, is the same, is very, very powerful for us. It means that Lama's with us the whole time. And I think it's here. Yeah. So Kensei Yeshua Rinpoche is cited on this issue, and he says that Guru Yoga, when we talk about Guru Yoga, it means this keeping the mind relying upon the teacher and employing that method in practice. This is what actually means Guru Yoga. But also, if you think about it in terms of yoga means union, right? So Guru Yoga, teacher yoga, is this idea of identifying with, recognizing no distinguishing between one's conscience and one's teacher. This is a teaching from Geshe Tsongkhapa. It's not like some modern Ben psychology thing. So also when Atisha was older, he sort of like looked like this, you know, and some Tibetan said, "Excuse me, Atisha, please give me instruction," very loud. And Atisha turned around and laughed and said, "My hearing is very good, but if you wish for personal instructions, what you need is faith." So faith in the teacher, right? And faith in the Dharma, faith here. Now faith is one of those words which has different nuances, meanings, and depa in Tibetan. And faith here is distinguished in terms of being able to see. There's no leap. So it's being able to see how these things work with clarity. There's no jump. So in some traditions, some religions, we talk about a leap of faith being necessary. And in this particular case, what we're saying is there's no leap required, right? So a good faith requires no leap. It's like a conviction that is seen through by understanding very, very clearly how it works. Then there's a strong, strong faith. This is the best faith. Some things we need to take on maybe with a little bit of leap of faith initially, especially the idea of Buddhahood, or if it's new to us, If we were introduced to the idea when we were children, then it's much easier because it's part of how we've been brought up. But if we get to hear about it later, or the idea of enlightenment or karma, then these things are much harder for us to naturally accept. We have to train ourselves to accept them. And sometimes that requires us to suspend our ability to accept until we're able to understand it more clearly. Then it's easier, of course. How are we doing? Okay. So again, then Rinpoche says, you know, like Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa says, sometimes you might see some qualities and some flaws, some faults in your teacher, and they might be legitimate faults, but on your side, it's just no good to concentrate on those faults. It's far better to concentrate on those good qualities. And I understood that, absolutely right. It's easy enough if you're in a negative mind or whatever to find faults with anybody, including your teacher, and it just blocks your ability, blocks your path. So normally only while you're in a bad mood or whatever, but generally it leaves a seed that needs then to be cleared up. So you want to try not to do that too much. Again, Geshe said it's best really to remember good things as if they're written on stone, bad things as if they're written in water. Yeah, okay, you understand. I don't need to explain that. And he says there are also examples. Lama Tsongkhapa gives the example of Salingpo, who was the primary teacher of Atisha. But Atisha actually was a Madhyamaka, held the most efficient view of emptiness, whereas Salingpo was a Chittamatra. But even though Atisha had a greater understanding of emptiness because of his grasp of Madhyamaka, it was Salingpo who gave him the path to bodhicitta, to this bodhisattva mind. And therefore, he says, it doesn't matter. It's good that I have developed an understanding of Madhyamaka, but without this, what Salingpo gave me, I wouldn't have been able to practice. Okay, we're running out of time. So a few things we've got to say in terms of relying upon the teacher with material, service, and practice. So there are things about saying being able to offer material good, money, and goods to the teacher is one way of being able to benefit your practice. Another way is through service, through offering your a duty and performing deeds for them. And a third way is through practice according to how you've been taught. So importantly, and this is an important aspect, is that the perspective of giving finances or money to a teacher is different from the student's perspective and that of the teacher. The teacher has to have absolutely zero interest in finance whatsoever, and not even take them into consideration. And in fact, again, Geshe said to me, if you want to give money to your teacher, you have to do it proportionately, not disproportionately, according to the status of the teacher, but also according to your own needs. He said it generally much better to give a small amount that is not going to create waves than a large amount that is going to cause trouble. He said if you have a teacher or a lama who has a small amount of wealth, better to give a small amount of money than a big amount. Now, this isn't because you're being stingy or you want to change things, but the point is to say that otherwise you can end up it becoming more than it needs to be. The idea is saying I'm willing to share with you, not I want to change your life. And likewise, one can find, especially in the Asian traditions, you can find people saying how much they'd given to the Lama, so it becomes sort of competitive about how many millions they may have given to a Lama. And generally, teachers won't ask how much it is. Sometimes they will, they do it for a reason, but normally they won't ask. it shouldn't be of import to them. And likewise, often if you give a large donation, you'll find, especially in our tradition, and we're talking about the same Rinpoches who I mentioned earlier, they will say, "Are you sure about this?" They will ask. They will say, "This is a lot of money. Are you sure you want to do this? Look, I've got plenty of money. I don't need anything." And so then it's like, we don't just take money because you give it. You need to be able to give that. So there is an important aspect here, which is to say, in fact, giving materially is far better to give a token rather than to give a large amount, right? Much, much better. Because otherwise it can cause all sorts of difficulties, especially not necessarily with the Lama, but also with their attendants or other people and so on, who then see that as wealth. And there's cases of some Lamas, young Rinpoches and so on, with in Manali or in India recently, where there was a police investigation on something. You were searching for something, and they found the entire bed was filled with dollars. Yeah, I mean, like millions of dollars, and it caused trouble because, of course, there's some law against how much money you're allowed to stuff in your mattress in India. So it's not so useful. It's far better to just token gesture, right? And then again, as I said before many times, there's the idea of expecting money is really very, very much frowned on, especially in the Lam Rim tradition. Offering sort of service is like offering to help, assist, take to the doctor, drive, these sorts of things. It's very good to be able to do that when we can. And many of us who are present have actually done some of that work. But the most important and the best way to offer to your teacher is by practice, because this, again, is the transformative behavior that takes us to enlightenment. And that's by far and away the best, in the way that we're able to, ideally in accordance, obviously, with the Buddha Dharma, in terms of the words of the teacher. And again we'll find this. So in the Garland of Birth stories, which is the Jataka tales, it says, "The worship that you should do in return for my help is to practice in accordance with my instructions." So this is Bodhisattva Buddha talking here. Yeah. However, so there is this question, it comes again and again, and even back in the 15th century, and it's like, it says we must practice in accordance with the Guru's words. What if the Guru's words leads to an incorrect path or incorrect behavior? And the Sutra on Discipline, which is a part of the Vinaya, says, if the abbot insists you do what is not in accord with the teachings, refuse. Right? Cloud of Jewels Sutra says, with respect to virtue, act in accordance with the Guru's words, but do not act in accordance with the Guru's words with respect to non-virtue. So knowing what's right and wrong is absolutely relevant to being able to know whether or not you should follow the words of the teacher. And Lam Rim Tsongkhapa says, again, do not listen to non-virtuous instructions. And it's terribly sad when that happens and people take advantage as being Lama of expecting sort of clearly non-virtuous activity from their students. And even the 50 verses of the Guru say, if you cannot reasonably do as the Guru has instructed, in this case, reasonably means because it's unethical or it's just mistaken, then just excuse yourself with soothing words. We don't want to create trouble here. We just want to say, oh, unfortunately, I can't do that. All right. So there's a teacher, there's a text, the 12th birth story. So the Sutra of the Wise and the Foolish, yeah, which is the 36 Jataka tales that were translated into Tibetan. We actually have now, because of the Pali, we have a huge number of volumes, 3 or 4 volumes of the Jataka tales available to us in English, but the Tibetans didn't have access to all of these. And in the 12th birth story, it talks about a teacher who So this is when Buddha was a bodhisattva, before he became Buddha. And his teacher said to all of his students, look, normally it's not right to steal, but in this particular case and for these particular reasons, I need you to steal, and it's okay, you can steal. And the students were like, okay, all right. And Buddha kept quiet, and the teacher said, why are you quiet? And he said, I can't do that. It's wrong to steal. You've made it clear. I know it's wrong to steal. You can't tell me what to do. And the Buddha and his teacher said, you've got it. You're right. You need to listen. You need to think what a teacher says. You can't just act accordingly. So he said to the other students, listen to what this man said, right? You need to think for yourself. Just because I say steal doesn't mean you can go and steal. So there is this thing primarily, and we need to be careful about it, of saying, and also saying later on, which is that even if we hear a verse, if we hear somebody reciting a verse with a sutra verse, here we are. So the Krishna Yamari Panjika says, the Black Enemy of Yama text says, somebody who hears even a single verse and does not conceive its speaker to be his teacher will be reborn 100 times as a dog. And so we have this slight apparent contradiction, which is, well, in one sense, we need to be very, very careful of choosing our teacher, and only those teachers who meet these criteria can we accept as a teacher. And yet later on, where it's like you have to accept anybody who just quotes any line of sutra as being a teacher. And so how is that conflict resolved? I think importantly is to recognize where that comes from. So okay, I'm right out of time, so I'll be very, very quick. Within Tantra, everybody is a teacher. One of the points about this, developing this thread of awareness, is where we actually perceive everything as being Dharma, the opportunity to understand Dharma, the opportunity to see Dharma, and therefore to criticize or to establish a critical thought is a mistake. And at that point, if we're seeing everybody as Buddha, then not to see our teacher as a Buddha just is foolish. It doesn't make any sense at all. So in that sense, when we're within that practice, and this is where the Krishna Yamari text comes from, it doesn't make any sense for us to say this is not a teacher, especially if they're quoting Dharma. So in that sense, because everybody is Buddha, everything is Buddha. But within a general context, and certainly with a normal mind, with a normal viewpoint, one needs to be very careful about who one accepts as a teacher in terms of the idea of saying, this is who I want to I relate to as being my conscience, my guide, right? And therefore, in a sense, it's like, yeah, Lama Tsong-kha or Buddha is far better than somebody I might have some doubts with later on. And that's what Geshe meant earlier on. So that's really about it. We did actually manage to cover it. Well, I might do a little bit more on the Guru next week. So thank you again so much. You've been very tolerant. I've gone over. First of all, before anything else, we should dedicate the merit from this. Any value at all that's been given or has been received, or anything that has inspired me in any way, may I put that towards becoming a Buddha, benefiting all beings continually, without exception.